What's up everybody, I'm Jason and welcome back to some more tips and tricks for the Canon EOS R5. In this video, I'm looking at 4 more options that affect the display of images in the viewfinder and on the screen. The first of these options are found on the Shoot 8 menu, or rather, they are the Shoot 8 menu. These are Viewfinder Display Format and Display Performance. Viewfinder Display Format has 2 very creatively named options, Display 1 and Display 2. Display 1 uses the full viewfinder area for the live view image with detailed shooting information superimposed over it. This provides the biggest possible image and therefore the highest viewfinder magnification. However, the detailed shooting information is displayed in white, and that can be hard to read when you're shooting bright subjects. Display 2 reduces the size of the live view image slightly, creating a black border around it, and this is where the detailed shooting information is then displayed. Both the combination of white icons on black and the fact that the icons aren't superimposed over the live image makes them much easier to read in this mode. That said, that easier readability does come at the cost of some viewfinder magnification. Another use of the Display 2 is that by limiting the size of the viewfinder image, it can be slightly easier for some users, such as those with glasses, to see the whole image without having to shift their position around. Personally, I have my camera set to Display 1, as I don't have trouble finding and reading the icons and prefer the larger image area. In fact, most of the time I don't even have detailed shooting info displayed in the viewfinder anyway. Moreover, with the increased eye and nose relief of the EOS R5 over, for example, the 5D Mark IV, I don't have any problem seeing the whole image in this mode either. The second entry on the Shoot 8 menu is Display Performance. This controls whether the camera and displays run at a maximum of 120 frames per second or at a lower, more battery life-friendly frame rate. Personally, I keep my camera set to power saving all the time, but I also have a very hard time seeing the difference between the 2 options in practical use anyway. That said, this option warrants a bit more discussion than simply saying it allows for 120 frames per second. For starters, the setting affects both the screen and the viewfinder, though the LCD screen's frame rates are lower. Additionally, this setting may control something deeper in the camera, as when shooting in HDR-PQ mode, the setting is locked to smooth, and it's not at all clear to me at least why HDR-PQ would need a faster refresh rate. With that in mind, I did some tests by recording the LCD and OLED EVF at 240 frames per second. Based on counting frames in the video files, it appears that the rear LCD updates at around 30 frames per second in power saving and 60 frames per second in smooth. Meanwhile, the EVF appears to update at 60 frames per second in power saving and 120 frames per second in smooth. This also goes to explain some of the differences in power consumption between the LCD and EVF. According to Canon's numbers, you should expect to see a 30 to 35% drop in battery life simply by using the viewfinder over the LCD. Likewise, you can expect to see a similar size drop in battery life going from power saving to smooth. In total, you can expect to see as much as a 55% drop in battery life when going from shooting using the LCD screen in power saving mode to the viewfinder in smooth mode. Additionally, if you look at the numbers in the back of the manual, you might also notice that the battery life for the viewfinder in power saving and the screen in smooth are actually equal, and they both appear to run at the same frame rates based on my testing. Therefore, it seems that even though the viewfinder's resolution is around 2.7 times higher than the screen's, as far as power consumption is concerned, the difference in resolution is immaterial compared to the frame rate. My testing also answered a question that I had about display performance and battery grips. In the manual, Canon doesn't provide data for the smooth setting when using a BGR10 battery grip. The implication, at least to me, was that maybe smooth didn't function when a battery grip was attached. However, in the testing that I did, it was done with a battery grip attached, and the display performance definitely does change. So it appears that Canon's lack of numbers, at least for the BGR10, has more to do with their interest in completeness of testing rather than actual differences in performance. To make a long story short, While I wouldn't discourage anyone from using smooth in situations that warrant it, such as sports photography or any kind of fast-paced action, the cost in battery life is significant. As a result, you're almost certainly better off leaving the camera set to power saving most of the time. This is actually another good setting that might make sense for you to include in either a custom shooting mode or a My Menu page for quick access. The next setting I want to talk about is the Viewfinder Review setting. This is found on the Shoot 7 menu page under the Image Review menu item. This is another one of those options that makes the camera behave a little bit more like you would expect of a DSLR. Enabling Viewfinder Review, assuming you have Image Review enabled, will cause the image you just shot to appear in the viewfinder for the specified image review time. You can, of course, go back to live view display by pressing any button that triggers autofocus or metering. However, if you disable Viewfinder Review, and this is what I've done, the image review will only appear on the rear LCD. If you're shooting through the viewfinder will stay locked to the live view stream after every image is captured. However, you can still automatically review images immediately after shooting simply by pulling the camera away from your eye, and the image will appear on the rear LCD. Basically, this mimics the same behavior that you'd have on a DSLR with an optical viewfinder. The final option I want to look at is high-speed display, and this is again on the Shoot 7 menu page. High-speed display controls how images are displayed in the viewfinder when shooting in continuous high drive modes. Much like the display performance setting, the manual isn't perhaps the most clear, and even the wording is somewhat hard to parse. The manual says, and I quote, "High-speed display that switches between each shot and the live image is available when shooting in a drive mode set to continuous high. Display is more responsive, making it easier to follow fast-moving subjects." The manual page goes on to make a couple of cautionary notes that the image may flicker during high-speed display, especially at high shutter speeds. Moreover, the high-speed display is not performed when the aperture is higher than f11, the shutter speed is slower than 1/30th of a second, a flash is used, an extended ISO, so 50 or 102,400 are selected, or the conditions make autofocus difficult. Additionally, high-speed display is always enabled when shooting with the fully electronic shutter. So what does this all actually mean? Well, before I get into what I've been able to discern, I want to be really clear about the testing I've actually done. Specifically, there are a lot of things that control how high speed display will behave and how fast the camera can respond to things. This includes things like shutter speeds, apertures, ISO, the autofocus system, the lens being used, and even ambient conditions. In short, I didn't test this exhaustively or extensively, or at least I haven't done that yet. If there's interest in a more exhaustive dive into exactly what you could expect from high-speed display mode, let me know in the comments below. Not that I'm making a promise here either way. With that said, the most visible and obvious difference I saw as a user is that when high-speed display is enabled, the viewfinder doesn't black out between exposures. So in my limited testing, and this is limited in all caps, bolded, and underlined, it seems like when this is enabled, if the live view can't be displayed, the previous image will be displayed until the camera captures the next image. Changing the display performance setting from power saving to smooth didn't make any difference in the test that I did. However, that doesn't seem like it would be incongruent with the setting as a whole, as there are conditions where high-speed display will be disabled, and it would be jarring to jump back to seeing the display blackout in those cases. The other behavior I saw in testing was that while high-speed display is enabled, the aperture doesn't always open up for focusing between frames. Admittedly, this should be expected as it's implied by the comment about the AF and aperture values in the description. I also saw that the behavior would switch from staying stop down to opening and closing the aperture stop, which is also implied in the manual. Unfortunately, I can only be in so many places at once, and while I wasn't recording the display while I was looking at the front of the lens, so I can't say whether the image persisted or whether the screen switched back to blacking out when the behavior changed. It's entirely possible that the behavior I saw earlier in the test, the persistent image, was the result of this behavior switching to blacking out. That is, if the camera can keep the lens stopped down while shooting, you get the live view. If the not, then instead of blacking out the viewfinder, it just retains the previous image until it captures the next. As an aside, this may also explain why some people are reporting to get accurate focusing with the RF 100mm macro at apertures between f2.8 and f11. If they're shooting in continuous high and have high-speed display enabled, the camera may be focusing with that lens stopped down. That would counter the focus shift that lens exhibits at high magnifications. Unfortunately, the 100mm macro is a $1,400 lens and not one that I'm not overly interested in right now, so I'm not going to be running out to buy one just to test out this theory. So should you shoot in high-speed display? Put simply, yes. The only potential downside I see to enabling high-speed display is that the lens may not focus at the maximum aperture. And while that's true that focusing wide open, then stopping down for the exposure, does ensure that the AF system has the best possible information to work with to ensure the most accurate focus, Canon's dual-pixel AF system is also clearly capable of focusing very accurately at much smaller apertures than a traditional AF system would be comfortable with. Moreover, while high-speed display is enabled, if the camera doesn't feel that it can accurately focus, it will revert to focusing wide open and stopping down. So there you go, a bit more on controlling the behavior of the displays on the EOS R5. If you found this useful, or at least a bit interesting, let me know by smashing that like button. And also maybe consider subscribing. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.